On tonight's episode of Mr. Norris's In Case You Missed It, we look at the Constitutional Convention, the issues with slavery, and the dastardly Three-Fifths Compromise. Hey, hello, hi, and what is up, everybody? It's your favorite history teacher, Mr. Norris, with the good hair. How's it going tonight, everybody? We actually are going to be talking about kind of a somber, depressing topic tonight, and that is the Three-Fifths Compromise. If you watched one of my previous videos, during the Constitutional Convention of 1787, there was much debate to be had about how the formation of government should be set up. And following the Great Compromise, we established that we will have a three-branch government with an executive branch, a legislative branch, and a judicial branch. In that legislative branch, there will be two houses, an upper house of a Senate, which will have equal say. And smaller states were happy about this, that each state is going to have equal representation. Fantastic. And in the lower house, that will be based on population, meaning that larger states with a higher population will have more representatives. Okay, so how does this lead to the Three-Fifths Compromise? Well, once we establish that our new government and that our Congress and legislative branch is going to be dependent on representation, the issue now comes up at the Constitutional Convention: do slaves count towards the population? Do they count towards the total number that should be counted and represented by Congress? Now, there are two different thoughts on this. Back even in those times, the North still had some slaves, but the South had an overwhelming amount of slaves, much more than the North did. The South's total population back then, if you look at a census, a 1787 census, was about 1/3 of its people were enslaved. And like I said, while the North still had some slavery, it just wasn't quite as widespread. There were actually some states in the North that had already started moving towards emancipation, states like Massachusetts, Pennsylvania. So if you were a southern state when this issue came up, you actually definitely wanted slaves to count towards the population. They're 1/3 of your people. And the more that you can count these slaves, the more representatives you can get in Congress, and you'll thus more likely be able to pass legislation that's going to be in favor of slavery and basically keeping alive your economic means. If you were from the North, if you were a Northern delegate at this time, you would not be in support of counting slaves. And there were a couple reasons. Just number one, basically, they just had way less slaves in the South. So why would you want to count them? It's going to be much more beneficial to Southern states than to Northern states. Another argument by a lot of abolitionists, even back then inside the delegation, were towards the South: if you don't treat your slaves like people, then why should you count them like people? You treat your slaves like property. And at this time, I guess we all do, right? We treat our slaves like property. We don't treat them like people. We don't give them citizenship. We don't give them the right to vote. So why should they count towards the representation? That was a crux of the argument for the Northern side. So they debate about this for a good amount of time, and a resolution needs to be made. Well, eventually, James Wilson of Pennsylvania and Roger Sherman of Connecticut spearhead a committee that comes up with the Three-Fifths Compromise. That's right, Roger Sherman, same guy that helps come up with the Great Compromise. This creepy looking dude is all over the place compromising. And basically what the Three-Fifths Compromise says, and this is just crazy to wrap your head around, that this was in our Constitution in 1787. The compromise that they came up with is that instead of counting either no slaves towards the population or all the slaves towards the population, we would count 3/5 of a state's slaves towards the population. So for every 5 slaves that a state has, 3 of them would count towards the population. And this is just crazy messed up for a number of reasons that I'll get into for a second. At first, the South wasn't even happy with this proposal, but Northern delegates actually sweetened the pot a little bit by also making this translate to federal taxation, and them saying that you're enslaved, you'll only be taxed as much 3/5 for your slave population as well. You'll be accounted for in taxation. So that kind of changes the South mind. All right, well, we're getting a deal on taxes now too, as well as representation, and they're all in. So why is this just crazy messed up? Number one, you're counting slaves towards the population for representatives in the South of lawmakers that are probably going to make laws that keep slaves slaves. So you're literally using these people and counting them to create more lawmakers that are going to keep them slaves. That's just insane to me. Also, and this is just incredible and in no good way. You're essentially back then when we wrote the Constitution telling African Americans in this country that they are 3/5 of a person. You're counting all five, 5 out of 5 white people towards the population back then, but you're not counting African Americans, right? Or you're not counting them fully. They're 3/5 of a person, right? And actually, while we're on that topic, there's a lot of people that are not being represented by this new constitution and voting rights in early America. Women don't have the right to vote. Native Americans don't have the right to vote. And actually, a lot of white males don't. Basically, back then when the Constitution was written, it was put into place that really only wealthy landowning white people could vote. If you go look at the election of 1789, when George Washington wins and becomes our first president, only 6% of the population voted for him. 6% of the population. That's like the amount of people that like the band Nickelback. That's not a lot, right? So that just goes to show you just the underrepresentation at the beginning of our early nation, our early formation of government. A big theme with this Constitutional Convention is that these compromises, the things that get agreed upon, even the Founding Fathers, they knew it was not exactly perfect, but they wanted to get something on paper, wanted to have some kind of resolution to keep this convention going. All right, so there you have it. In 1787, when we come up with the Constitution, 3 out of every 5 enslaved African Americans in a state is going to count towards the population for representation, a real black guy, dark part of American history, but something that needs to be spoken about nonetheless, something that we need to learn and learn from, and that's part of history. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you enjoy history other than stuff like that. Make sure that you like, comment, subscribe. If I miss anything, please tell me. I don't mind. You can do that. Remember, history is life, and in the words of George Washington, the surest basis for public happiness is knowledge. So go out there and get some. Have a good night, everybody.